For me, there are several different reasons. One of them, you can categorize these reasons into academic or learning. You can talk about psychological reasons. You can talk about social and political reasons. You can even talk about historical reasons. And I think the underlying message behind all of those is that issues of diversity are always present in our lives, whether they're individual lives or cultural lives or action lives, whatever the actions happen to be. So if that's indeed the case, and if you're talking about the educational enterprise, you want to make that much more effective and successful for students from different cultural frames of reference. And if it is indeed true that the education process is a cultural process too, so that then makes it's incumbent then for educators at all levels, whether it's elementary, secondary, higher ed, to include cultural responsiveness so that we can, if you will, nuance our curriculum, our instruction, how we interact with students in such a way that we are sensitive to their cultural frames of references. With the idea being is that as learners, we all, and as teachers too, the technical tasks that we're wanting to do, the information we want to, as instructors, transmit to students and we want students to learn, to master, those things are always filtered through some cultural lenses. And in most cases, that cultural lens tend to reflect the dominant group in society. So what we're talking about in cultural responsive teaching is then to make sure that other cultural lenses are accepted as legitimate, as natural, normal, routine, that we send instructional and learning messages through those cultural filters to students from different ethnic backgrounds. Whether those students happen to be of Asian, African, European, Native or indigenous or Latino heritage, because all of those folks then are socialized in different cultural frames and references that affect how they go about the learning process. So the argument then follows that if we do cultural responsive teaching for students who are ethnically, racially, and culturally different, then they have a better chance to perform at a higher level of academic achievement. One of the biggest challenges is what I sometimes call the ethos of especially higher education, but it's true in K-12 as well. And those institutions have cultures too. And we have long customs and traditions in the academy, for example, that are contrary to cultural responsiveness. For example, in the academy, we think of there's a certain way to teach, and that way of teaching tends to be some variation of lecturing. And it's very difficult to find people in higher ed to do anything but lecture. But lecturing is not necessarily the best way for students from different backgrounds to learn. So I think one of the biggest challenges is to counter custom and tradition. And those things are so deeply entrenched in the institutional infrastructure that it's very, very difficult to change those. And teachers are socialized, professors, instructors are socialized into those frames of reference, into those norms, if you will. And in any circumstances, it's very hard to change your norms. It's very hard to change tradition and custom and habit. So those were some of the bigger kinds of things. I think another big challenge is, it's still very difficult in the United States for us to, as a people, as a culture, as a society, to really honor differences without feeling that if you deal with differences, somehow or another you are giving preferential treatment or deferential treatment to some and others and all of that. We find it difficult to just accept the fact that a difference is. It might be indicative to, it certainly is indicative to the shaping of the United States, and I think it's indicative to the human condition. So just to accept that as just a normal part of being, but we tend to attach evaluations and judgments to them. And as soon as we begin to talk about differences, so very often in the United States, we think that we are automatically discriminating. And I don't think most people want to take on that ownership to say, I'm discriminating against someone. Many people will want to avoid dealing with cultural responsiveness as a way to protect themselves from being accused of being prejudicial, being racist, being sexist, being homophobic, or whatever kind of difference you want to deal with.